From never having lost a single fight in his UFC career, to calling out Jake Paul for an easy payday, here's why fighters should be terrified of Paddy Pimblett. It's like no one can beat this dude. Pimblett is a pretty unique fighter, and you don't see someone like him popping up every day. In fact, some people even say that he's the next Conor McGregor. It kinda makes sense, since, like Conor, he holds an unbeaten record, and this is just the start of his career. There's no stopping this kid. Right now, he's got a record of 20 wins with no losses. It's like everybody who steps into the octagon with him forgets any strategy they came in with, and just panics for a bit before Paddy either submits them or knocks them out. An important thing to remember is that Pimblett's last fight was pretty controversial. He faced off against Jared Gordon, and instead of finishing his opponent like usual, the fight went the distance and it came down to a judge's decision. They ended up giving the baddie the win, but the crowd seemed to think otherwise. To make things worse, Paddy wasn't the most humble dude ever on the mic, and this kinda got a lot of fans upset thanks to how immature he was acting. Still, if there's one thing we learned from this fight, it's that Pimblett's definitely got the judges on his side, which makes beating him a lot harder. I can't blame him either, because this man is a social media genius. When you talk about playing the game, Paddy's not just a good coach, he's the whole frickin' franchise. The man knows exactly what to do to make sure his name stays in the spotlight. He's on every social media platform out there, and is a pro at making sure he stirs up controversy every now and then and keeps fans talking about him. The Gordon fight was a great example of Pimblett milking his win to the max. Remember folks, all publicity is good publicity. People might hate you, but that doesn't mean they'll stop talking about you. Paddy is also on YouTube and is known for posting regular content. Most of the time, he just posts vlogs in the lead up to his fights. And that's more than enough to keep fans engaged, because who wouldn't want to get a behind-the-scenes peek into the life of a UFC fighter? He also made headlines when he made a post-fight speech about men's mental health. Not a lot of people talk about it, so when Paddy pulled up to talk about it, everybody listened. I can safely say that that was one of the defining moments of his career so far, because it helped elevate him to a whole new level of fame. He wasn't just a fighter who posted videos online. He's slowly becoming a goddamn icon who stood up for what's right. His winning every fight he gets also helps his public image a ton. The baddie has a 100% finish rate in the UFC, for crying out loud. Even though he's only had 4 fights in the promotion so far, he's been insane in every one of them. There just hasn't been a moment in any of his fights where the fans might get bored. Take a look back at his win over Leavitt. His opponent tried everything they had in their playbook, but just couldn't figure out how they could break the baddie. Instead, Pimblett took his time and broke Leavitt down both mentally and physically before casually moving in for a rear naked choke and nabbing the win. He also ended up getting the Fight of the Night bonus, so that's always a nice plus. His fight against Jared Gordon was no different. Sure, it did kinda look like Gordon had him on the ropes in the final few rounds. Plus, there's no denying the fact that Pimblett was gassed out towards the end of the fight, but the fact is that Paddy was able to power through it all and kept fighting until the end. When the fight first started, he showed Gordon with some insane leg kicks, while eating a few hooks himself. He traded blows with his opponent throughout the bout, and in the end, he took home a unanimous decision. A lot of fans thought that the least the judges could have done was give Paddy a split decision win, since Gordon gave him a run for his money. Honestly, one of the biggest reasons why the baddie's so unstoppable in the octagon is thanks to his risky fighting style. So, who better to come and break it down than the man himself? There's a reason why everybody likes to call Paddy a scouser. It's because he embodies the word perfectly. He's one of the best brawlers in the division, and there's almost nothing his opponents can do when he starts smashing their faces in. He recently appeared on an episode of The Pat McAfee Show and talked a bit about his fighting style, which is pretty unique, because unlike other fighters, he loves getting hit. It's a big part of what motivates him to keep on going during a fight. I know, it's a bit weird since the goal is to avoid taking punches, but you have to remember that Pimblett's goal isn't to drag the fight out till the end. It's to try and end it in as little time as possible. The last thing he wants to do is let a fight last more than a single round. Because as we all saw in his fight against Gordon, his cardio isn't his strongest suit, and the longer his fights go on, the more of a chance his opponent gets to finish him instead. Up until now, though, he's been able to finish most of his opponents. Fans have begun to look forward to his speeches after his fights, because he often has some pretty insightful stuff to say, like his stance on men's mental health. After his UFC London win over Jordan Leavitt, Pimblett took the mic and gave one of the best speeches I've ever heard come out of a fighter's mouth. Usually, they just thank their coaches and call out their next opponents. But the Bassie decides there was something much more important he needed to talk about. To put things into perspective, around 5 hours before the weigh-in for that fight, Paddy found out that his friend had committed suicide. It was then that he decided to raise awareness for men's mental health. So he stood in the middle of the octagon and addressed the men in the audience. He talked about how it was okay to feel alone and depressed, and emphasized that taking one's own life is not the answer. Instead, talking to someone about it, trying to look for a solution, is always a better way of dealing with things. He said that he'd rather have a mate cry on his shoulder rather than go to his funeral the next week. Breaking social taboos, he made it a point to mention how seeking professional help doesn't make you look weak. Instead, at least for him, you'll be the strongest person out there, because you'll be putting your fear to the side and actually doing something about your problems. Later on, during a post-fight interview with BT Sports, he mentioned the same thing, and said that if anyone ever felt like they were alone, it was important for them to know that there were people out there who care, and that they don't need to end their life to solve their problems. Apart from saving lives, our English hero decided to call out one of the biggest YouTube boxers out there right now. Apparently, Paddy thinks Paul is an easy payday. It all started when Jake thought it would be a good idea to poke the bear, and offered Pimblett $1 million if he knocked him out in a sparring competition. The thing is, Paddy is not the type to back down from a challenge, and he actually put out a message for Jake saying that he'd be down to beat his ass any day of the week. The thing is, now that Pimblett's ready to rumble, Paul is nowhere to be found. He was actually pretty cocky a while ago, but now that Pimblett's calling him out again and again, he doesn't seem to care all that much about the Brit. In fact, Pimblett even sat down with the legendary Daniel Cormier, and the two men had a conversation about Jake. They both don't like the dude, so what did you expect? They couldn't stop themselves from cussing him out in front of the camera. From what I can tell, it's pretty obvious that Pimblett's ready to take Jake down, and doesn't think of him as anything more than an easy way to make some quick dough. Besides, Paddy's a celebrated knockout artist, and boxing is a big part of his style of fighting. I'd be pretty scared if I was Paul, because he might have pissed off one of the most dangerous men in the UFC right now. So, from calling Jake Paul out for an easy payday, to never having lost a single fight in his UFC career, that's why fighters should be terrified of Paddy Pimblett.